Hi, and welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy. The goal of this podcast is to demystify therapy, what can happen in therapy, and the wide array of conversations you can have in and about therapy. Through personal experiences, guests will talk about therapy, their experiences with it, and how psychology and therapy are present in many places in their lives. With lots of authenticity and a touch of humor, here is your host, Steve Bisson.
Bonne année, Grand Nez. Thank you. Happy New Year. And if you want to look Grand Nez, you can go ahead and look it up. My name is Steve Bisson. This is the premiere episode of season 11, or episode 133 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. Very excited to be here for an 11th season. I'm looking very much forward to you guys listening. And if you're on YouTube, you're going to see that I'm going to try to do these intros and the outros that I do recorded like on video so you can see them. So this is my first time doing it. Any feedback is always welcome. So this is what I'm doing. But for episode 132, if you listen to it, as my guest talked about their experience last year on my podcast, Finding Your Way Through Therapy, and it was really good. So please go back and listen to that. But episode 133 will be part 1 of 2 with Dr. Hayden Duggan. Dr. Hayden Duggan wrote a few books, but Dr. Hayden Duggan also is the founder of the On-Site Academy in Gardner, Massachusetts, a residential trauma treatment and training program for public safety personnel. He is the team clinician for Boston Police Stress Support Unit and is the chief psychologist for the Boston EMS Peer Support Team. He's worked in many fields. He is a former firefighter. He's a paramedic. He's an EMT. He will talk about that, I'm sure, during the interview. And I'm going to separate it in two because I know this is recorded. This breaking, we recorded it, and I know this is a 2-part episode for me. So I know he's going to talk about that. He's going to talk about other of his experience, but just a fascinating guy. This is a guy I've been chasing down for about 6 months to have this interview. But Hayden is a genuine person, very interesting. And here is his interview. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to the first episode 133 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I am Steve Bisson. You've known me for a while. Season 11 is upon us. And I have someone who, he's a busy guy. I'm a busy guy. We finally got together. I'm excited beyond any possible imagination anyone could have. But Dr. Hayden Duggan is someone who has been referred to me by so many people. How great he is. He started a bunch of different things that I'm going to let him talk about. But I told him before this interview that it's an honor for me to talk to him. And he returned the favor. And I'm like, no, believe me, it's my honor. He said, people said good things about me. And I said, who's lying and why are they lying to you? But at the end of the day, just very happy to have Hayden. Welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy.
My pleasure. Great to be here, my friend. And as we say, I'm not any busier than anybody else, just less organized.
Hey, welcome to the club.
Right. As witnessed by the fact that although you sent me multiple text messages, etc., I still, on the day in question, said, oh, yeah, it's 10:30. Just anyway.
It was funny when I saw you at 10:30. I was actually in a session. I'm going to share this with the audience.
Yeah, sure.
And I saw you're like, I'm waiting. And I'm like, I told my client, I'm like, can you wait 1 second? And I responded quickly because I'm like, he's going to sit there for like 30 minutes. I can't do that to them.
I would have. Well, that's me. And I had moved somebody to 12 from 12:30 to 10:30 so that we could, anyway, the other way around. Anyway, It doesn't matter. But here we are. Great to be here, Steve. And I'm glad to know that it's Bisson and not Bisson.
Thank you very much. See, you just, I know you went to Canada in November, so now you know how to say everything in French suddenly. That's what happens when you go to Canada.
Well, actually, I lived in France for a while, so.
Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, great.
I'm actually one of the few people that really, really loved it. I was in the south of France, where it was mostly rural and farming people, and they were fabulous. So anyway, that was
on the Côte d'Azur, the other side?
Yes, and where they say 55 is not 55, it's 55.
55, yes. And then Paris, and where they hate the Parisians as much as Americans do.
Hate them with pure white hatred. Pure white hot hatred, I should say.
That's what I tell people all the time. I said, you would be surprised how much most French people hate the Parisians, except the ones in Paris.
which is awful because it's such a gorgeous city. But anyway, the people kind of suck. But that's not all of France at all.
No.
And we must remember, it was the French soldiers at Dunkirk at the very end that saved our asses and are responsible for like 300,000 British troops getting off that beach and all those French soldiers died. And they stood there and took the oncoming German fire, which had they used tanks, they would have broken through, but they didn't because they wanted to save the tanks for later. So yeah, that was the French. And remember our own revolution, and the French came just in time. Anyway, I'll shut up. That's not what we're here to talk about.
No, we could talk about history all forever because I love history. It's part of one of my favorite things. Learn about history, as my old man used to say when he was alive. Learn about history because those who don't know about it are doomed to repeat it. And I don't want to repeat history sometimes.
Indeed. And, my wife says, if you ask me what the weather is, I'll give you the history of meteorology. So it's terrible.
Well, we've been, I kind of like threw a lot of like great things at you, and obviously you returned them back, but maybe people know about me and they know I'm not that great. How about, and I'm joking, of course. How about you talk a little bit about who you are and tell me about yourself?
Well, wow, that's a not interesting question, but I'm a mental person, as we call us in the first responder world.
Yes.
I'm duly diagnosed. I love the kind of work you do. We both love doing treatment. And I like crisis intervention work. I go back to the days when in the 70s, that was great stuff. Wrote a couple of unread books, and I won't inflict them on you. One was about empathy, the other was about crisis intervention, long since out of print. And then how did I get into emergency services? My old man had a heart attack, and he survived it. Okay. He was a bull, very strong, and I didn't know what to do. I felt really stupid. And I was in my late 20s, I guess, at that time. I happened to be home when it happened. And so I said, well, I'd like to be an EMT. I had no background in emergency services at all. My brother's in the military, but so.
How old are you at the time?
Maybe I was about 28, I think, 26, 28. Maybe I wanted a uniform, who knows? Yeah. And so my local department was hosting an EMT course, a little bit like the draft. They said, yeah, no, you can take it free. It was expensive in those days, but you got to give us a couple of years of service on the ambulance. I said, sure, it's fine by me. And that's how it all started. I got on the meat wagon, as we call it. And I actually liked it a lot. Not that I was all that good at it, but I liked it. And then, well, you're there, you got to do the firefighter 1 deal. I said, oh, okay. So I didn't know anything about fires, nor did I want to. Scared the shit out of me. I figured, well, I got to do it. So then I and I became a call firefighter for a department back in those days when most of the departments were heavily called. We didn't have as many professional full-time firefighters. And it was very busy, a lot of fires in the 70s. Yeah. And my God, I loved it. I loved firefighting to the point where, and I did it a part-time, so it helped me get through graduate school. I was on scholarship. And
where'd you go for graduate school?
Harvard.
Excuse me.
No, that's just why I don't tell anybody.
I know. A little bird told me you wouldn't talk about it, so I figured I'd just say it. You opened it up.
I was very, very lucky. I went to a program called Clinical Psychology and Public Practice. It was an experimental program. It lasted about 25 years, and you couldn't be part of the program unless you were willing to do public practice, work for public agencies. Later on, if you wanted to do private practice, that was up to you, but you had to. All our internships were in public settings, so it was a good beginning to learn. It is an excellent program. Working places like DYS or jails, or working for locked state hospitals, things like that. That's where I sort of started. So, but at the other side was the firefighting side, and I loved it, and to the point where I applied to go full time. Would have been my career. But they were adding a lot of firefighters, and there was 14 guys in front of me who had been, they were townies. They grew up lived in the town, fought fires as Eagle Scouts, became part-time firefighters. They were way ahead of me, so it was hopeless. So I didn't even try them. Later on, I became part-time. I was very happy and retired as a deputy many years later. But tried never forget where I came from. So those are the two sides, the duly diagnosed. either a psychologizing firefighter or firefighting psychologist. I don't know which. But it did. I tell you.
How about a great human? That's always that's a good start for me.
One thing it does is for me, for this old dude, it kept me very humble because there's no real place to hide in the fire ground. And you can be as arrogant or foolish as self you are until the defecation hits the rotary blades, to put it politely. And you're in a building fire and you ran out of air and there's zero visibility. You're sucking your mask and you lost the wall. You have no freaking idea where you are. And you feel like you're going to lose bladder control. In fact, once I did. And then you realize, okay, this stuff is real and it can kill you. And so let's not get too, let's just stay right size. So when nature overwhelms you, I think that's a good experience. But anyway, I stayed in for almost 40 years on and off. Retired in a little small town, which I love, where I live here now, and was a part-time deputy. Although when you're on, when you have that standing, you're always on call because you're always listening with a third ear to hear, did the bus get out of the barn, the ambulance, or who's on engine 2, and etc. I better get going because that's not the crew we want for that. So my family just put up with all of it. And everybody in emergency services knows the missed Thanksgivings, the running out the door on Christmas Eve, your kid's birthday party, dad's gone. Children of first responders, let alone spouses, really are a different breed themselves in terms of resilience, in terms of just getting used to, dad loves to do this or mom loves to do this. They're nuts, but it's the way it is. I always remember one thing too, and it wasn't fighting the fire, it was CISM. The night of the Worcester cold storage fire, my chief came by and said, get in. To me and my wife, we're going. And we got there at about 8 o'clock. The fire had started at 6:13. And by the time we got there, all 6 firefighters were declared lost. And that was a night that I'll never forget. And we did all death notifications with Kathy Minahan and my wife, who had lost her husband in a Charlestown warehouse fire, ladder 15, over 20 years ago. So a sidebar is that after the cold storage fire, Valerie and Kathy started a group for spouses who lost a loved one in the line of duty called the Wings Group, Widows in Need of Grief Services. But that night, we were so stressed, I guess, or so shocked that when we came back at 4 a.m., and we went back and spent the next 8 days there in the tent, we drove right past our driveway. They talk about when you're having a real post-trauma symptom, perceptual distortions, which I'd never really experienced, even in the size of things. And they also talked about déjà vu and jamais vu. In French, that I'm referring to something I think I've already seen, but I actually haven't. I've never been there. But jamais vu is also being in a place I should know. It's familiar, but I don't even recognize it. There's 31 chemicals in the stress response, and they are powerful, and they can have effects on cognition. It was 4 a.m. We're driving down a dirt road in Hubbardston, and I drove right past my own driveway. And my wife looked at me, I looked at her, I said, where are we? She said, I don't know where you are, but we just passed our own driveway. That was a powerful, very powerful night. So you kind of stay right size in those things. And I don't know how I got off on that. Let me shut up.
No, we were talking about different things in your career, and retiring and all that. And I think that for me, Worcester, Massachusetts, December 3rd, 1999 will be etched in
Right.
stone in my head, and the Worcester 6 is something that's very near and dear to me because I was watching TV. I was working in a group home that day.
Oh,
and
we've had similar experiences. Yep.
and remember, like, as a, when I came into this field, I wanted to work with kids. I end up in a developmental disabled home with people who have Prader-Willi. And
Mhm.
I'm watching this and I'm like, now I have this intense urge to go and help mentally,
Yeah.
not physically, because I don't have
Right.
that capacity
Right.
for people with first responders. So when people ask where you fall, how did you fall in this job? I say, ask backwards. It's not even what I wanted.
Yes.
And for me, it's realizing that things that really hit you are just those things that you got to remember. So I don't know if that was like the oh my God, this is what my calling is, so to speak, but it was
Yes.
certainly an acorn that was planted in my head, because all I can do is think about what are the other like I knew the other towns went there, but I can't imagine being in the city of Worcester, a firefighter, knowing your 6 brothers are in there. And yeah, I
Yes.
can't imagine.
We've had a very close relationship with Worcester Fire for years, for that reason. And a guy named Spike Wallace, who's since passed away, but he was an amazing guy. He was a Vietnam vet who was wounded, and he was on Cambridge Rescue. A very smart, intelligent, just great guy. One of the founders of critical incident stress management in the Commonwealth. He and I were in the tent right at the bottom of the building. So they'd stretched yellow tape that when you came off the deck, every one of these places has a name for it. Worcester was the deck, and in New York it was the pile, and
Right.
Oklahoma City was the pit. And when you come off these things on the job, I don't mean as doing the stress work, there's usually a place where you go for like RAC center, rehabilitation center. So that was ours in a tent. And Spike was the person who kind of got us started in doing that kind of stuff at the cold storage fire. We were there all 8 days. And we've always had a close relationship with all those Worcester folks. However, I identify with what you did because that's how I started. I started working after I got my degree. I started working for DYS, started working group homes, ended up working for the retarded. And then I ended up ending a first marriage after 13 years. It had its shelf life. We went separate ways. We're still very cordial today, thank God. And we co-parented our kids. But at that time, I went into therapy because I felt like I was a mess. Plus, I was drinking a lot. That's how I dealt with my stress.
Now, here's another dual diagnosis you were talking about.
That's true. And I think this was when I was 36. How I got into it is interesting. I had a supervisor at Children's Hospital where I did my postdoc, who was great. And she said, listen, hey, you got to learn how to give the Rorschach. And I said, okay, it's my least favorite instrument. But so I had to take it in order to give it. And one of the cards.
And I'm going to stop for a second. Rorschach is an interpretive test where it's ink blocks, for those who don't know what it is. It's a very much interpretive, unfortunately not very reliable or valid
Correct.
testing. But in case people don't know what it is, part of finding your way through therapy is to make it as clear as I can about what therapy looks like, what we're talking about. So I apologize for
No, I apologize for just throwing it out there. I should have explained the same thing. So yeah, it's a projective test, but as you say, it's not very reliable, but it can be interesting. In my case, it probably, saved my sanity, because on the color shock card, there's one card that everybody freaks out on where they see a monster or whatever. I stopped talking.
Ooh.
And I stared at the card.
That's not interpretive, by the way. That the Rorschach, I think, is interpretive, but when you see people's reaction to it, that's something you can visibly observe. And I think there's psychological value in that.
You're not kidding. And I went someplace else and I got the lit syndrome, lump in throat. Whoa. And I'm looking at this card. The room got very silent, still started to spin a little bit. She was very kind and very nice to me. She said, Hayden, I think you need to see somebody. So she got me to a fabulous shrink. I loved him because he swore. He was a combat vet. He was although he was the director of outpatient psychiatry at McLean, just a down-to-earth guy,
right?
Really made me feel cared about. And I'm saying all this because I was not doing any treatment myself yet. I was still working for state agencies. And I was doing 90 hours a week. And what do you know? I got an ulcer. And of course,
really?
was in the midst of losing a marriage and was also drinking myself into oblivion, not knowing that I had an alcohol problem until my sponsor eventually said to me, Hayden, you might not think you're an alcoholic, but you'll do until one comes along. In the meantime, why don't you just start dealing with it? But anyway, physician heal thyself. So he said to me, the shrink said, you're working with the retarded. And I said, yeah, I'm going to link this to, CISM and understanding why incidents bother us. He said, why are you doing this to yourself? Are you at this many hours? You have an ulcer now, and you got 90 hours a week. What are you trying to make them all unretarded? And I looked at him. I said, Zenas, what are you talking about? He said, what connection do you have to this? And my God, it was like I just got hit with a 2x4. I had a younger sister who was retarded, and she died. And I was 8 years old when that happened, and I never got to live with her because in those days, the prevailing wisdom of a pediatrician was stick them in institutions. We wouldn't do that now. She died in an institution. And I guess that had a much deeper effect on me than I knew. So he worked with me many years, a wonderful guy. And eventually, I got in the fire department, continued to be a psychologist, living in the town that I was in. We had a working fire, of which there were many in those days.
Yes.
And I just remember, Captain Copeland on the phone, on the radio, who was the brother of Don Copeland, who was a famous weather forecaster at that time. And Copey, as we called him, was very quiet. He was a tough guy, kind, but, if you got 3 words out of him, you were getting a lot. And I just remember I was not on duty. He tore past my house, lights and siren. And I just heard him say on the radio very quietly, step on it, people trapped. That's all Copey had to say. So I dropped what I was doing. I was only a block from the fire station. So I got on engine 24 first, which I liked because I was the only one that could drive it because he had a double clutch on upshifts, and I really enjoyed it. Captain Belmont got in the seat next to me, a couple of firefighters. We arrived on scene, and I won't tell you the story of the fire, but it was ripping. We had fire blowing out under the eaves. Basically, what had happened, I'll be brief, was that a family was coming back from a skiing vacation. They drove all night. Dad went to work. It was about 7 o'clock in the morning. Mom got out of the car. It was February. There was ice. There was snow. And she's unpacking. And the daughter, little Kimberly, said, 12 years old, said, Mom, just going into the house. I'll be upstairs. Okay. Mom's unpacking. Literally, like 5 minutes later, the whole house erupts. What we forgot is that fire goes up and out.
Yeah.
So here we see the second floor with smoke puffing out under the eaves. And we think the fire's on the second floor. So we said to the mother, where's your daughter? She said, she's on the second floor. We did a balls up search on the second floor. Zero visibility. I found the family dog, golden retriever, dead, threw it down the stairs. We had 2 firefighters injured. Finally, we had to bail out down the stairs, over ladders. All fires go out eventually, right? But this one was ripping, and it was surrounded around from the outside. So finally it went out. And then they said, Duggan, take a crew, go downstairs and do overall in the basement. So I'm in the basement, picking through, drop down from the ceiling, sharps like snowblower blades and everything. Smoke's beginning to lift. And over by the cellar stairs, I see what looks like a garbage bag. I said, oh, what the F is that? And it was like figure ground distortion, like you're focusing an old slide projector. Whoa, that comes into focus. That's a kid. The charred remains of a kid. And what had happened, Steve, was that she decided to go down to the basement where they had a rumpus room and just watch TV. They'd been up all night. She wanted to just relax for a minute, lay down on the couch. Yeah. She hit the light switch. Gas had been escaping the entire time they'd been on their vacation. That one flicked the switch and it was a gas-fed fire. It exploded, but it went up and out.
Right.
Nothing we could have saved her if we'd known, but we went to the wrong floor.
Right.
We missed it. So I ended up shoveling the remains into a body bag. Didn't really think much of it. You didn't at the time. Just do your fucking job and shut up. So shovel in. I remember being surprised at how heavy the internal organs were. The liver, the lung, the heart, the kidneys, stomach. And then I didn't think much of it because what do? We went out and got drunk. That's how we handle stuff in those days. Yep. In fact, that's what was encouraged. Put out the fire, step over the body, and go get drunk. So anyone of us could have told you where you could find a Bloody Mary breakfast at like 10 o'clock in the morning by that time at the Concord Traffic Circle. Yeah, Howard Johnson's. They would see us coming in looking like we looked. They say, the back room. There we go to the back room. They keep us away from the other customers. Why am I saying all this? It effed me up to a fairly well.
Feel free to say the whole word if you want to. I don't. I don't do editing on that.
I appreciate that. So to finish this up, and thank you for listening to it. It's a little long-winded, but it was a seminal event in my life.
Right. That's why it's not long-winded if it's seminal in your life. But go ahead.
It didn't work out too well.
No.
And I did have nightmares and flashbacks, as you would have expected, only because I was so up close and personal with her. I finally went into therapy, and I had to get sober because I was drinking myself into a stupor, trying to get rid of that stuff. And as they later teach you in the trauma work, alcohol is not only central nervous system depressant, but it does make flashbacks and nightmares more vivid. The colors are more vivid.
Yeah.
And it'll knock you out and put you to sleep, which is what I wanted because I couldn't sleep. But then you wake up 3 or 4 hours later, fitful, you're still in your BDUs, you got a shit shower, shave, and you get to roll call, you get to work, 7 o'clock. And you go for years like that. No sleep, alcohol, up, down, adrenaline exhaustion, medicated, go to work. Over time, that doesn't work too good. And so what happened to me is about 8 years later, my department said to me, because by then I was doing some of this work. I had become a forensic doctor. I was working for the courts and the jails. This is a long story, but I wasn't working with kids anymore, which had been my career for like 15 years, or the retarded. But for a job, it was the courts. Right. And it was a good job, and I enjoyed it. But my department said, there's this new stuff called critical incident stress management. And you ought to take a look at it, because if you do, we will send you folks to be helped. And at that time, I happened to be the veterans agent in town. I was seeing vets free. My idea of helping them was to sit on my porch and drink Jim Beam with them. That was great. I thought I was great. They loved coming to my house.
Yeah, I'd go see you for therapy too. That's why I stopped drinking too.
So now I'm getting sober. You've taken away my best friend. I can't sleep. I still got the images, but at least I'm not drunk. And there's no odor of alcohol in the courts. So I went to this program, 1989 this was. And it was taught by Vicki Harris, who was one of the early instructors in critical incident stress management. And she was a fabulous speaker. And I'm there wrapped with attention in a room of 150 firefighters, Nashua, New Hampshire. And I'm learning a lot. I'm way at the back row. And she gets to the Hackensack fire. I'm trying to talk about triggers and events and how you connect dots. And the Hackensack fire was a famous fire in the CISM lore because what happened was it was like the cold storage fire in the sense that there was a wide open space in the garage. Okay. When they first came in, there was no smoke, nothing. They had the mask hanging down. What they didn't realize is the fire was ripping in a crawl space between the ceiling and the roof, which was concrete and sealed completely. The fire had no place to go but down, and we couldn't have vented it because of the roof. So they walked in, the Hackensack firefighters, And there was one engine crew with a lieutenant and 5 guys, and they got way far in. All of a sudden, there's a reason I'm telling you this. It broke through, and the fire came rushing down. And just like what happened to the firefighters, I know you know the story, the cold storage fire, that whoop, when that petroleum-based installation let go, all at the same time, the whole building, cold storage fire, erupted. Same thing in Hackensack. And these guys, they're firefighters. They put on their mask. The lieutenant took them to a paint locker or a closet in the back. They couldn't go back to the entrance they came in. And they had a steel door, and they closed themselves in. And they couldn't get out because there was bars on the first floor window, but they had comms. So this lieutenant is very calmly saying, yeah, we're stuck in a paint locker here. If you can just rip off these grates on this window, we'll be okay, but we can't go out the way we came. Nobody heard him. In those days, they only had one channel on the fire ground, and the chief was directing the fire from the outside. Multiple incoming units from other towns, his whole department there. Now this thing is ripping. What started out as just not even smoke in the building, possible fire, is now a conflagration, but he's got a crew way in the back. This is before we had good, procedures around keeping track of people in a large area, search, etc. And they couldn't get out. And they remained very dignified, just like the cold storage, the Worcester 6, right till the end, saying things like, okay, come get us. It's getting hot in here. We're running out of air.
Right.
And, and that ding, and then the mask sucks, and then you start to ding, ding, ding. You're out of air. So, okay, we're breathing off the floor. We're buddy breathing. And they're sounding more urgent. They never once lost their cool until finally it just stopped. Nobody on the fire ground heard them, but everybody in Scannerland heard them. As true in the Worcester cold storage fire.
Right.
Many of those families of firefighters lived in that area, and they heard the transmissions of the dying firefighters. So, although at that time the cold storage fire hadn't happened yet, we learned a lot because the cops came on scene after it was out and said, "Hey, don't worry. We'll take care. We'll get you guys out. You don't need to see that." The firefighter said, "Excuse me, we take our own people out." And they said, "Well, let us take care of the bodies of the ME techs. We'll take care of it." They said, "No, you're taking." And there was a fist fight. So the Gemini team, one of the first teams in the nation that was so well regarded with fire, CISM team, critical assess manager team, as you know, everything's volunteer, has a clinician, has a trained team. That team came in and really had their hands full because they got to mend fences between police and fire. So that was a fire that was very emotional for the crowd to watch. To me, I started to feel nauseous. I had a rapid heartbeat, and I really felt sick and dizzy. I got up and I walked out, and I went to the water fountain outside. And there was a very kind, compassionate EMT named Neil Braveman from Boston EMS who had started their peer support team. And he came up behind me, put his hand on my shoulder. I jumped like through the ceiling. He said, "You're getting triggered, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah, but Neil," he introduced himself. "I don't know why, because I've never been in a huge, large area search like that. I've never been in that level of fire." He said, "It has nothing to do with it. When your body reaches a certain level of heart rate and fight or flight and increased blood flow to the muscles and all the stuff that's going on in your brain, you process information 2 to 10 times faster than normal, it doesn't know that it's not back in something else. When else have you been that scared?" Kimberly Jolly Fire. That was easy for me.
Right.
So at that point, I got CISM trained. I did love working with the folks. Obviously, we did everything free. And I'm almost done the long story of how we got to the on-site. I got the help I needed. I did get sober. I stopped working on the department for quite a while, probably 4 years. And I just concentrated on doing this stuff. And they brought a firefighter to me and said, we're gonna give you our very best. His name is Tim Tenney, 1991, the Nickel Street house fire in Gardner. It was the same kind of thing. balloon construction fire, i.e., there's a space between the floors and the walls, and the fire travels up that space. So in a balloon construction fire, you look in the basement for the origin, even if it's in the ceiling, in the third story, because that's where it started. It traveled up the side of the building. So Tim and his partner.
Just to stop you for a second, also,
yes,
to let everyone know that that's the construction that was very prevalent in the New England area for many, many, many years. So this is not something like people like said, oh yeah, this is going to cause fires. It wasn't purposeful, but this is something of old structures of old New England from the late 1800, early 1900s. So I just want to throw that out so that people don't go and wait a minute. Well, why did they build them that way? Well, duh, we didn't know any better. That's why. But anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, it's second time. I thank you. Because I get cranked up and then I forget that.
That's why I'm here. I'm just hosting here,
that.
just sitting here, just listening.
No, that makes a big difference. Thanks. Anyway, particularly with Victorian structures.
Yeah.
So Tim and his partner, who was a Vietnam vet, tank commander, went into this basement. Heavy fire. My department was there, but I was not on it yet. That was Hubbardston. I was living in Acton. And they sounded the all out to get everybody out because all three forces were fully involved. Tim and his partner were in the basement because they'd been told there were 3 children there. The fire had actually started when the mom went across the street to play cards and drink with a friend. She left all 3 kids in this basement apartment. It was one of their birthdays. They tipped over a candle and started the fire. Anyway, I think the baby was about 6 months old. And the kids were 2 and 4, very little. Tim and his partner were not going to leave the ground floor. Again, 0 visibility. They had what's called a rollover, not a flashover, but the fire was rolling over their heads all the way down the hallway. And they couldn't for the life of them find these kids. To this day, Tim, who's still the chairman of our board 30 years later, will tell you that he swears that he couldn't possibly have heard this over the noise of steam, windows breaking, diesel engines, pumps cranking up, people talking, yelling through their masks, all the sounds of fire combat. He swears, and so does his partner, Davey Upgard, that he will swear that he heard, as he passed one of the rooms, he heard a sound like this. Mom. That's what he heard. And he couldn't have, Steve. There was there was so much noise you couldn't hear a thing. They went in that room and they found both kids.
Underestimated by the public how loud a fire truly is.
It really, and they found both kids in there. So they carried both kids out. In those days, we didn't have a hyperbaric chamber in this day, so they got life flighted to Maine. They couldn't save the baby, unfortunately. So they said, "We're going to bring this guy." I was still living in Acton. We're going to bring this kid to you to do something, because CISM was very new then. All I did, honest to God, was 6 debriefings with him. The standard 7-phase model, which is not therapy. It's a treatment for a critical incident. It's definitely a crisis intervention treatment, but it's very structured. It's a structured discussion designed to have a very positive impact. All it's supposed to do is just lessen the impact of the event and jumpstart somebody's normal coping abilities. It was designed for people who are already pretty resilient. It doesn't work with civilians as well. It shouldn't be used with civilians. It's designed for people who've been there, done it, got the t-shirt, seen the baddest, maddest, saddest, and they can handle a tough fact phase where you've got to get them to look in the eye of the tiger and just describe sights, sounds, smells, what they went through. They're able to do that, but you got to do it as a group because they need that peer support. You know, my telling some medic, "Oh, I understand why you couldn't intubate that kid on a bumpy country road who was very anterior in his throat presentation." You get to the hospital, the nurse looked, he said, "How come you didn't make the tube?" My saying to him, "Oh, well, you did a great job. I'm not a medic."
Right.
It doesn't mean anything. I have other things to give him, but not that or her.
Right.
But another medic looking at him and saying, "Hey, listen, I understand exactly what the fuck you're talking about. If I had $1 for every tube I missed, I'd be rich." That means something. So that's where we began to realize, okay, we have to do this as a group where possible. But Tim came along, so I just did something you're not supposed to do, which is I used the model 1-to-1. I had no choice. He had been in a psychiatric hospital for 30 days. His department didn't know what to do with him. He couldn't function. He had floored PTSD. And this was the best interior guy. They all said he was the best interior structure firefighting guy they had. So they didn't mean to do him any harm, but he was in a psychiatric unit, locked unit for 30 days, used $18,000 of insurance. He came back out and he still couldn't function because they didn't address the trauma. Being very well trauma informed, it's different from regular ongoing psychotherapy, which is fine for something else, but not for losing 2 kids in a house fire. All we did, every time we start to talk, Steve, you get a blinding headache. There was such an overload of chemicals. He was sitting on so much. Like Eddie Lee from the old State Police stress unit used to say, kid at the beach with a beach ball, the more you stuff it down, the more it's going to take your head off when it comes out.
Yeah.
So he would just go out to his van. He was an electrician. And he'd sleep in his van for 45 minutes. Then he'd come back in. And he'd get it done. We went through all 7 phases of a debriefing. And he finished beautifully. He went back to work. Never had another day where he lost any time due to trauma. And he and I, several years later, said, hey, Tim, sometimes the debriefing is not enough. It's great, but you got to have some follow through. But they won't go into ongoing therapy, which I do, which you do, which is great, but sometimes they just won't do it. We need a place. We have halfway houses for recovering addicts. We got halfway houses for the retarded. We got halfway houses, pre-release centers for prisoners. What the F? We don't have anything for police, fire, EMS.
Well, that concludes episode 133 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. Dr. Hayden Duggan, you will be back next week or next episode, depending on when you listen to this. But he will be back for the part 2, and I can't wait to hear that. And I hope you join me then.
Please like, subscribe, and follow this podcast on your favorite platform. A glowing review is always helpful. And as a reminder, this podcast is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. If you're struggling with a mental health or substance abuse issue, please reach out to a professional counselor for consultation. If you are in a mental health crisis, call 988 for assistance. This number is available in the United States.